You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to Beast Over Burden, powered by Barbell Logic. I'm your host, Niki Sims. I'm a strength coach and a nutrition coach, and this is our lovely co-host, Andrew Jackson, also a coach.
Good afternoon.
Afternoonsies. Welcome to the show where we talk about what it's like to lift for the long haul, what it's like to train for high quality of life, how to navigate the challenges that life throws at us. Forever. We never stop unless it's the end of the workout, and then we stop until the next time. Well, okay, I will say that, and then I'm going to say this right now. Yesterday was Thursday.
What are you going to say?
You'll find out when I say it. Yesterday was Thursday, which is a day that I normally lift because I hate lifting on Fridays. But I was too tired, which happens.
I was shocked to hear that.
Yes. And I started thinking, I bet other people get tired. And I noticed lots of reasons why I get tired. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about when there's a solution to be had or when maybe there's a change to be made and what those look like. Because I came up with a bunch of reasons. And, I hear that from my clients too, just like, I'm just wiped. I can't do this. Can I move the training day? And the answer is always yes. But sometimes there might need to be a change in behavior to increase energy. And then sometimes it's being mindful about what's actually going on.
I'm sure that is a common problem that people have.
It says beast mode over there. I am sure that I can empathize with this situation.
I've been in some pretty exhausted states, and there have been times where I'll push a workout. Yes. I think that it depends a lot on the circumstances for sure. But there's trade-offs I make for sure. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yes.
It's almost never to push because I'm tired. That's where I get a little bit like I can sympathize. Like I can sympathize with this because yeah. Let's dive in.
When I have the room to slide my training day down, and I know I'm going to feel better the next day, and I'll tell you why I knew why I was going to feel better the next day, then I was like, heck yeah, I'm going to move this. All right. So sample size Niki, once a month, I have a day where I am just too tired. Like, I know what's going on.
Once a month.
It's my hormones. Yeah, it's the first day of my cycle.
Okay.
And I'm dead. Like, it's like the only time that I can sit on the couch in the middle of the day, close my eyes, and actually fall asleep. Like, that really doesn't happen for me. I actually kind of have a hard time napping. But that actually happened to me last night. I was just like, I'm just going to sit down before I make dinner, totally conked out.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I knew, just because I'm aware of what's going on in my cycle, that was the day that I was going to watch dog videos on Instagram and cry. Look at my dog who's not doing super well and cry. And then I was going to be really tired. And I knew, and it happened, that I was going to feel better today. And I already do. So in that case, like, okay, that's a pattern. I know my body's going to go there. I'm just going to let myself chill and scoot my training day today because I had the time in my schedule to do it. If I didn't have the time in my schedule, I would have just gone. It'd have been fine. But
I think that's an excellent reason to take an extra day.
And I will admit that I didn't know that for a long time. I wasn't tracking all of that very well. And so I probably would have had a day where I was just like, oh no, I'm so tired. I'm getting sick. This is the end, without
program is terrible. It's not working.
The awareness. Yeah. I'm a failure, because all of those other emotions seem to collapse in on me on that day. It's just like, I better talk to my coach and change everything and go on a diet and bulk and just like, chaos.
Right. When did you start paying attention to the cycle or those factors?
Oh, as recently as within the last couple of years. And, I'm 39, so that's kind of embarrassing. And maybe it's just changing now because that happens too. But yeah, very noticeable that I have a day where I just can't even. But that happens with other circumstances too. I've noticed that can happen when I, whether I knew it or not, am in a caloric deficit where just like, I'm so tired. You get to, Thursday or Friday or Saturday, and you've put yourself in a caloric deficit. Maybe you didn't know that you are, but then you're just depleted by the end of the week because of how you've been eating. And I think that's something that can be sneaky with people too, is maybe they got back from a trip or whatever. It was like a celebration weekend and they're just like, I need to eat less. I need to get rid of this extra body fat that I put on in 3 days, which isn't what happened. You're just bloated. And you just start eating way less over enough period of time that you start to feel the energy deficit and you're tired because you're depleted. And so I think that's a really...
Does depleted feel, how would you describe that as different than feeling tired?
I would say you feel it for more than one day, like especially when you've been going to bed on time and you haven't been drinking. So you're executing similar sleep patterns, but there are 2 to 3 days where when you go to do something physical or when it's like normal workout time and you're just like, you don't have the energy like you usually do. You start your workout and you're just like, man, kind of sore. Things are moving slow. Like I felt peppy with this weight, the last couple weekends, and now I just don't have it. So I think it's it lasts for more than a day is, I think, a useful kind of gauge for that one. And if you know that you're in a caloric deficit, maybe you are intentionally in a caloric deficit and you are feeling your caloric deficit. So that could totally lead to just not having the energy that you need. And I think what usually helps with that is figuring out where you're getting your macros and eating more regularly throughout the day.
Do you notice that on different lifts in different ways? Or is it more of a systemic depletion or fatigue energy kind of?
Well, way more on lower body. Lower body is so demanding. So, if it could be during the lower body day, or sometimes it's, the 12 hours after the lower body day where, I think I even messaged you this week after my lower body day where I was like, I can't walk home. Please come pick me up. And you're, 3,000 miles away.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
It would have taken a while. I would have waited. But
about 27 hours.
About 27 hours. But yeah, that was a moment where I was like, I know I've been eating in a deficit and now I'm feeling it because I am just wiped out, And when you have consistent behaviors, you can be more useful when you're looking for something that might be a little bit off. Like I do a similar leg days a couple times a week. So I have enough of an idea of what that feels like throughout the month. And then enough of an idea to be like, that doesn't feel like I want it to feel. Let me think about what's going on. I mean, when everything's in chaos, you have to create some sort of consistency somewhere before you can start figuring out what's off.
Yeah. What comes to mind when I'm thinking of that question are the better part of a decade during which I just felt like crap pretty much all the time and was sleep deprived and exhausted from 12, 15-hour work days, small child at home, commuting an hour each way, and
waking up at like 3 something.
Sometimes, depending on, it was revenue target or shipping needs of the week. I was there till midnight, and then I would come home to get a couple hours of sleep and then go back and would still train. And it was just a mental process of setting aside expectations often and doing it. Just do it kind of mentality that it was never going to feel good. It was never going to feel like the time to train. And yet I knew that I wanted that to be prioritized no matter what. So if I had to get up an extra hour early and squat in the freezing cold garage first thing, because I knew if I didn't do it then, I definitely wasn't going to do it by the end of the day because I'd get home at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. That was what I did.
Yeah.
And so, I think the scenario you're talking about where you've got a pretty consistent routine and some day just feels kind of off, that to me seems like a good opportunity to take an extra day of rest. And I do that frequently. My schedule's kind of all over the place right now, often more because of logistics reasons. I'm moving things around like, oh, this just fits better today versus tomorrow. So I would certainly encourage people to not worry about shifting a workout one day left or right. Rarely is that going to be detrimental to your long-term progress. But if you're in a situation where you just chronically, for one circumstance or another, don't feel good, that unfortunately is the time to suck it up and go lift.
Yeah.
That is where I do not have sympathy. You must go train.
Well, but if it's to the point where you've talked about this, you were a big advocate for recovery. And so it's finding the right amount of training that you can recover from. And if you're chronically not able to progress in the gym how you want to, and there are other levers you can pull, then it would be maybe you need to adjust the training that you're doing. Maybe you need to adjust your sleep hygiene. Maybe you need to adjust your caloric intake. But there might be certain things you can do so that even though you are chronically not feeling good and feel like and just doing this because you know you have to, maybe there are some things that you can do to feel less like a turd sandwich.
Yeah, we can talk about those. Just think that there's probably a lot of people out there, and myself included, that have just been in those situations where you're getting 3, 4, 5 hours of sleep. You're working 12, 13, 14, 15 hours a day. You're juggling family work. You're doing a shift work. I've got a client out there right now who's a police officer who's every 3 to 4 weeks going on to night shift. And where I think you're going that I agree with is that those, while I do continue to train or did continue to train, and my client continues to train, certainly move the goalpost on expectations for what the stress is. And with that police officer, for example, we now have gotten to a point where we preemptively manage the stress different during that week, because we've learned somewhat the hard way that if we try to keep piling on, even if the bar speed shows no warning sign, we have kind of a standing agreement that he needs to pay attention to his body on the day, because we've had a couple of instances. And I want to be careful because I don't want to nocebo somebody, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, look, if you got 2 kids at home and you're working a night shift that you're only on 3 or 4 weeks, your ability to recover is not as good. I don't think that's rocket science. I don't think that's noceboing to say that. But I do tell them, look, if you're feeling good and you want to rip it, go for it. But pay attention. You know, you've been doing this long enough. Listen to your body and pull back a little bit if it's just not there for the day.
Yeah, totally. I'd say a good message is you are going to have days when you feel tired and you feel like crap.
Absolutely.
When you have the ability to move it around, move it around. When you don't, still go do it. A lot of times you actually will feel better by the end of it. That's happened like 99.9% of the time.
That is my number one pro tip, if you will, and motivator that I use to this day is no matter how bad I'm feeling before the session, I'm sure that I will feel better than that after the session.
Yeah. Yep.
Particularly if I give myself a little bit of grace on expectations during the session and prioritize feeling better at the end of the session over an expectation that I need to hit a certain number.
Yes.
Which, again, I will always want it to be the good old HBD, heavy but doable, hard but doable. But once you've been doing this long enough, trust your instinct.
Yeah.
My caveat would be if you've been lifting long enough that you've failed reps and you've had that experience of what it's like to grind through a rep and fail, been doing this long enough that you probably have an intuition of when you're a rep or 2 from failure, or if it's just not the day to force the weight. If you haven't gone through that phase, it might still be the time to just add 5 pounds and do your program, you know, because you just don't know until you've failed a few times.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that your ability to interpret that has changed over time, or your perspective on expectations has changed over time?
Of myself?
Yeah, when you go into a session where you're not at your best recovery or energy level.
Yeah, for sure. And I really like working out, so I know that I want to do it. Like, that's just kind of a blanket statement that I'll get it done. But yeah, there are definitely days when I'm under-recovered, underfed, and it doesn't go very well, and I'll try, but then I have to dial it back. And then I'll feel embarrassed and guilty about having to do that for a few minutes and then be like, no, this is the right thing to do. It'll feel better next time. But yeah, it takes time. What I hear from some of my clients and why I think this is important is they feel guilty when they feel too tired. And it's coming from people like you're talking about. Like I have a mom who's doing a new nursing rotation. She's doing clinicals. So she is on the road working tons of time. And then, she's feeling guilty about all the other things that she's not able to do at 100%. I'm just like, you can't do 100% all over the place. Like, it's not going to go well. And so there's guilt associated with it. And that's when the phrase of minimum effective dose is important. Like, the minimum effective dose is actually probably less than it was before. Because if we try to do as much as we were, it's actually going to be worse. And I think that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, is dialing back is actually the method to success in those situations.
I think we've talked about the circumstance, thought, feeling, action loop before. And I think this is a great application of that mental exercise where you can interrupt that pattern of having a certain thought that, in this case, it's I'm not training hard enough, or I'm not training well enough, doing enough, fill in the blank. Therefore, I feel guilty. Therefore, I skip my workout, or I don't prioritize it. And then the loop continues indefinitely. And I think what's changed for me is, and I didn't do this consciously, but this model I think is effectively what I did, that you can step back, recognize the circumstance that I am working a crazy amount of hours, or I'm not sleeping what I know I need to sleep to be able to recover. And the thought then becomes, I'm going to get the most out of my training possible, and then feel good about it, and then keep training. And then I'm reinforcing that pattern, that the thought, instead of it being I'm not doing enough, it's I'm doing the best that I can given the circumstances. And then you can feel good about that. And I think that's actually a relatively recent change for me, that for so long the emphasis was on always adding more weight to the bar, or always doing a certain weight on one lift or the other. And then if I wasn't above a certain number, then I was not progressing. And now I just get so much more out of going into a training session and doing something over nothing, knowing that when my recovery can get back into a position where I can do more stress, or I can perform better, the performance always comes back, and it comes back faster than if I had done nothing. And then you come back and you have that session where you're sore, and it takes 2 weeks to ramp back up. Now it's like 1 session, 2 sessions, but it's because I did something during that down period.
What's helpful as a check to make sure you're not doing too much during compromised periods? Like you talked about your police officer client. Like, you've learned that there's such a thing as too much during that time. What was it like learning that?
I was repeatedly getting tweaks and basically little mini injuries. I think that's probably the extreme end of the feedback mechanism. You can actually train to a point that it starts interfering with your sleep. That's rarely going to happen when you're already not sleeping well. But you could always do something. And the limiter, your body's going to eventually tell you it's too much. I think that's the reality, is you will eventually hit a wall of exhaustion where, if you're at a point where you're just chronically so fatigued that you can't even do basic functioning, well, now we've got probably a different order of magnitude problem. The number of people that are experiencing that is probably very small. But, there is a point where sleep is probably better than training. If you're just so chronically fatigued, there's probably all kinds of biomarkers that you could look for on that. I'm trying to think of some that I've personally experienced, but when I hit what I would consider, there's all kinds of debate about overtraining or whatnot, but the period of time where I would consider myself having been in overtraining, I could not even do like warm up weight kind of numbers without feeling like I needed to lie down and take a nap, like right there. Like you just like physically, or you physically can't stay awake. I've had that happen before as well. But we're talking 1 to 3 hours a night of sleep, working almost 24 hours a day kind of periods of time.
Man, I gotta say, I am a total princess here because I definitely feel times when I'm just like, ooh, I pushed that week too hard and I don't like where I'm at right now. And I think I do that kind of regularly, but maybe I'm just sensitive to it enough to be like, I need to not do spin like I normally would, or I need to make sure I'm getting more carbs because I have arranged my life really nicely. I don't, I sleep okay. I don't work 20-hour days.
Yeah. I mean, I think your training setup is pretty optimal and you're performing at a really high level on multiple different ways of exercise. And you probably are, very sensitive to disturbances in that or fluctuations in that. I'm just trying to think of times where, which has been most of my career. I'm lucky if I get 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night and 3 or 4 consistent meals, and I'm on my feet 10 to 12 hours a day.
And things like, how you're eating must play into this quite heavily too. Because if your schedule is that difficult, eating must be all over the place too, which is totally going to affect your energy and how you're able to train and recover. So that's something like, as much as you can, in those situations or these times in life where it's like, okay, if you can't control something, stop stressing about it. If you can control it, what can you do about it? And maybe there's some control you can have over your food.
Meal prep helped a ton for me when I was in those kinds of situations, the extreme situations. I would often cook a pretty good amount of food on the weekends so that at least the protein would be available.
Is this the whole chicken in the boardroom phase?
The entire pre-cooked chicken. Yeah, those were, there's so many more options now than there were even just 10 or 15 years ago.
So true. Yeah.
With meal prep, every town not only has usually some sort of national trifecta level service they can get, but then there's usually some sort of local, custom fresh delivery opportunity and DoorDash, and you can get your groceries delivered.
Yeah. I used ChatGPT to just an exercise recently where I was like, I need to DoorDash food or something. What are the healthiest options around me? And it gave me a list of places that I could Uber Eats or whatever. And then I said, I need foods that fit these macros. And it gave me menu options from those places. And that took less than 3 minutes.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. So much easier now than having to go to Costco and getting a carton of egg whites and 9 roast chickens.
Yeah. Yeah. As much as you can, when there is high degrees of chaos, I recommend looking for ways to insert order wherever you have control. That's why training to me was actually something that I prioritized even when I was in peak chaos, because it was one of the few things that I had pure control over.
Yeah.
And it was worth it to me to wake up sometimes at 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning to be able to go do that thing and have that time, because I knew the rest of the day was going to be almost completely out of my control or completely in service to others.
You were the lower priority.
Yeah. And I knew the end of the day, I would be in that depleted state. So that comes down to values and prioritization. And for me at the time, it was worth losing sleep to get training in.
Yeah.
But there is a tipping point in there, and that's probably going to come down to each individual because everybody's a little bit different, where the breaking point is. But there is a point where sleep is probably more important than training.
You don't need to wake up an hour early to get, an hour of an interval training in. I don't think that's going to be useful for anything. Yeah. But if you need to wake up 45 minutes earlier to get your squats in,
right,
twice a week.
You got to prioritize the super high return on invested time, which is where barbells become so powerful. You can get so much out of just 2 exercises or even just 1 exercise and get in, do it, move on. And it's actually kind of a nice way to wake up when you take all the expectations out.
Yeah. I want to make the point here that we did not offer biohacking solutions. These are behavior related and expectations related solutions.
Right.
And I think that's super important because that's what it means for, committing to this and adapting to it with whatever you have to roll with in life. It's not about ice baths. It's not about green smoothies. It's about expectations and, behaviors and habits.
And taking ownership of those.
Yes.
Like you talked about last time, it's like you're the only one that can really take ownership of that. And if you're going to commit to this, it's got to be one of those priorities that just doesn't get punted on, because nobody else is going to fight for that to be a priority in your life.
Yeah.
Maybe your spouse will give you a hard time or something like that, or whatever. Some of your family members might make a comment here and there, but you're the only one that can do it. So it just comes down to figuring out how to fit it into your schedule one way or the other.
Yep. Love it. Well, thanks for I feel like you were the bad cop and I was the good cop in that one.
Let's go.
Yeah. You were the Jocko and I was the Namaste.
I want to reiterate, my training days are all over the place right now.
Oh, yeah. All over the country, in fact.
But I do it 3 or 4 times a week, every week, no matter what. It's just, that's where I think there's that balance of, got to be like water.
Here's the woo-woo.
You're formless, but
hard,
but solid. It's you will fill whatever vessel you are poured into, and you can move mountains and carve rivers into the earth with your power, but you will float.
Be fluid and adaptable.
Exactly. Before bed, I've been reading the Tao, the Way, basically.
Oh,
so all these little snippets of Eastern philosophy. I like having meditations and the Tao Te Ching. I'm blanking on the freaking pronunciation. Somebody's going to murder me for that, but
you need AI voice to overlay that one.
Anyways, you got the Eastern and the Western philosophy. Just kind of keep that on your bedside.
Yeah, because you have books on your bedside of the 7 rules of power and 48 laws of being the head honcho and 19 ways to be the biggest in the room. And then it's how to be water.
Yes. That's right.
Well, no doubt you got value out of that. We'd love a share. Leave us a review, and we'll see you here next week. Thanks, everybody.
And go train.
Now.
Gosh darn it.
Or tomorrow.